Hey there,
Hey,
everybody. I'm Carson Grubaugh.
I'm Brandon Graham. Welcome to Living the Line.
Thanks for being back, Brandon. I'm really excited to talk to you about the material that we're going to talk about today because you are one of the biggest fans, I believe, of this author, and I feel like a real expert on his material and all the versions of them in print and everything. So, what are we going to be talking about today?
Oh, today we're talking about Masamune Shirow's brilliant Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah, and I'm super excited because I'm very familiar with this property through having seen it when it came out in high school and all of these things, seeing the movies, but I've never actually read the full original material. I know I tried at some point during high school, and I remember thinking it didn't make any sense. And going back and rereading it now, I understand why, but I think it very much makes sense. It's just, God, is it dense and hard to follow?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I guess we should talk about. I've always regarded Ghost in the Shell as a second attempt at Appleseed.
Yeah, it seems like,
Yeah, when we talk about Appleseed, it feels like he's in the 1980s trying to figure out where humanity's future is going, and then he hit the 90s and was like, "Oh, let's restart. This is where humanity's future is going," because he didn't include uh, computers nearly as much, and Ghost in the Shell is a much more like cyberpunk version of things.
weren't they running kind of concurrently at some I got the sense that these were like short stories that were coming out while he was working on bigger projects.
Um, I don't know, maybe the later Appleseed stuff, when like the hypernotes, the kind of end of Appleseed stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that it was yeah, because I think some of the later Appleseed is newer than this, but I think the kind of impetus of what Appleseed was about um, kind of gels within the first three volumes, and this was after that.
Yeah, and this is 1991, 2001, and 2008. I've got the big omnibus that's got like 1, 1.5, and 2. I don't know, it's got all of his material in it.
Okay, yeah,
Um,
and yeah, there's the weird because he didn't like Ghost in the Shell. I guess it's called 1.5 now, but initially he was done as Ghost in the Shell 2. Like it
mm,
was serialized in Japan, and then I think his studio got hit by an earthquake, if I remember right,
hmm.
and he didn't want what was 1.5 to be the sequel, and he did the much more computer heavy Ghost in the Shell 2, which is the only Shiro book I have yet to enjoy. It's
Uh, yeah, I haven't got to reading that yet, but the art is not my bag. That really glossy computer stuff he's doing. Anyways, let's go ahead and take a jump in because this is going to be like Appleseed. This is going to be another long series of videos that we do piece by piece. Probably all my fault because this runs right into my like philosophy of information and AI interests and stuff. And the wildly kind of prophetic nature of what he's putting out in 1991 is pretty impressive.
certainly, yeah, he definitely does his research.
So I've got this gigantic chunk of a book that has all of them together. It's got that cool gun design on the side that I think you've mentioned before. And
Oh yeah,
then you have a number of different volumes, right?
yeah,
Versions.
yeah. I'm looking at yeah. So I've got the it's in the other room, but I've got the Kodansha version that has they're all basically based off. There's one sex scene in it. It's a weird book
Hmm.
'cause there's one really dramatic full color lesbian sex scene in it that uh, got like Shiro redrew a panel to cut it out of the original Dark Horse edition, and so I've got the version that actually has that, and I've got the Dark Horse edition that came out in issues as well. And I've even
Okay.
got a weird Young Magazine extra Ghost in the Shell edition here, which I think is one of the later chapters.
Oh,
But
that's like in Japanese.
yeah, but I've never seen this cover before.
That looks like when he moves on to that schlocky computer stuff.
It's not. Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's painted, but
Oh,
the background
really?
is weird,
Strange.
weird mix. Yeah, but this opening page is really impressive.
And I really like when he's doing this mix of like these computer generated effects in some of this, but then you can tell it's still like airbrushing and watercolors going on as well. And then just knowing that this was all written in 1991 really blew my mind. I was surprised that it doesn't seem like one continuous story so much as it is a bunch of short stories that kind of attack different ideas within this world that he's building. And
Sure.
given that I've seen the movie and stuff, I was like, wait, how the hell did they make this all into one cohesive narrative for the movie? So I think a lot of the reputation of this is based more on the anime than the manga. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's. I mean, I feel like Shiro stuff in general kind of gets more known for the adaptations than the original work. And this and I think I mean my first exposure to this was just seeing a Japanese print version of this at a friend's house when I was like 16. And
Yeah.
so it's really sold on how beautiful and weird and cool it was. And so I feel like the at least in America, the audience wasn't quite like I think most people over here probably saw the animated version before they read the comic. I don't know if it was translated.
I remember seeing this. I had this at some point. It came with a Wizard magazine or something. And I remember thinking, the color stuff just really blew my mind. Like this big thing here where he's talking about the neuro chip, that there's this chip that's like integrated into the brain with like biological material, which is
Yeah,
still.
that page really kind of goes against a lot of my personal rules for how to start a comic because it just like hits you with this big chunk of text that is just I mean, I guess it's almost like a textbook. It's just like this is what this image is.
Yeah, and that's how a lot of this works. I mean, but he's being very accurate about where we're going. In 91, he's saying, "Oh, we're going to be in an information intensive global network of corporate conglomerate states," which I think we're still headed towards that. We haven't got that right. And then he's talking about AI being born out of these neurochips that are like both computer and biological, which is something they're starting to do, biological computing, just like
Yeah,
right
we
now.
should talk a little bit about the top left panel there, the cityscape.
This one, yeah.
Yeah, because this is done in 1991, so this is kind of pre him working with computers. So my understanding is that the images that he's got on the windows, the kind of glossy things, would be him actually taking either a photograph or a piece of metal and running it through a color printer and then exacto knifing it out and cutting it out onto the page.
What? That's crazy. This stuff back here. And
Yeah, he
then
talks
this
about
was like a photo he took that he made. He made this out of like microchips and tinfoil or something.
I think so, yeah. I mean, that might be. It looks like a mix of painting and photograph.
Yeah, it's strange because it's almost like a Dave McKean, Bill Sienkiewicz type of thing where he's like gluing microchips to the paper and or
Yeah,
yeah,
because there's some stuff in
photocopying
the.
collage.
I have his art book here, and there's some stuff in
Hmm.
it where he talks about just like taking a piece of metal and color copying it and then cutting it out.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's wild.
guns here that he talks about doing that with.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the reasons that he fell so deep down the rabbit hole of being a computer artist is that he was so fascinated by pulling in all these things from reality and integrating in his work that suddenly when you can do so much more stuff with a computer, just kind of opened up what was possible.
Well, and when your whole like world that you're building is based on computers, he's obviously done heavy research into this stuff where he's like kind of speculating in the notes about how things will play out because he's so well informed about what is happening at the time. I also found this very interesting, and I get why I didn't really latch onto it as a teenager because he's really going deep into like the politics of a world
Hmm.
that exists this way. Like they're talking about forcing a rebellion to justify bot manufacturing. So they're gonna trick the populace into a rebellion, and then when they go on strike, basically, that's gonna justify building more robot workers. And that's all covered in like 1.5 panels where they're just kind of suggesting what these characters are meeting about, and then you get into the action scene
Yeah, and I like that he's showing the external shots of the hotel they're meeting in or the building they're meeting of the police shutting it down and evacuating everyone.
right here. Yeah. And he's such a I think that's the barrier to his work is he's such a fantastic world builder, and but he can do it in such a small chunk, or he'll have it running like while that's going on as well. And you really have to be able to hold a lot of information in your head to follow him sometimes. I know you keep talking about him as like, one of the few geniuses, and I think this book more than Appleseed definitely gives me that vibes from him.
Yeah, definitely. Also, we went past the suitcase machine guns, which are worth noting.
Yeah, these are awesome. And
Yeah,
again, you can tell he like figured out the functionality of the design. Like all of his stuff feels mechanically possible at least. Like they're not just random tech goobers that he's drawn.
yeah, yeah. It's such a serious storyline, and then to have this thing as cartoony as like the businessmen all use their briefcases or their guns.
But why wouldn't they? I mean, you got to be strapped. Here's he probably scanned the texture for this couch. It's just actual fabric that he scanned.
Oh yeah, yeah. And it looks really gaudy, but it's cool that he's doing it. Like it looks gaudy now because I think you think of it being like computer effect.
Yeah, but at the time, I just remember seeing this first Zero chapter here and thinking it was the wildest thing that I ever saw.
He's also doing a
And
thing where the character's eyeball is looking around the corner on the previous page. Did you notice that when he's firing his machine gun, his eyeball has clicked out of his brain, out of his head, and is looking around the corner?
oh, like his glasses that he's wearing is actually like embedded. Okay, I hadn't seen that. Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
So it's all these
So,
really fun, ridiculous science fiction ideas mixed in with like because in I know in Appleseed there's a thing where she has a little mirror she carries with her to do the same thing. So I think
mhm.
he's researching real like SWAT tactics and being like, how would this advance?
Yeah, and this is very much like we're almost there, right? We've got the Apple Vision Pro now where we've all got the heads-up displays, but this guy has it integrated basically into his head cybernetically, which with the neural chip that he's talking about, we're getting there with the Elon Musk Neuralink, and we're
Sure.
getting there with biological computing as well. So none of this stuff I don't think it seemed terribly far off in 91, but it almost seems imminent now. And the fact that, yeah, he throws that away with no explanation and it's so easy to miss is just a testament to how intensely thought through everything is in here.
Certainly.
And like here, I noted that he had this guy's reflections in the glasses being yelled at. Just these little details like that really
Yeah.
make it so rich. And then I will forever have this image burned in my head because that's probably one of the most grotesque things I had seen as a young kid. This image of the guy exploding. It's so gnarly and so well
And he makes
done.
a point at the bottom of that panel to point out that he's using delayed fuse soft head explosive shells to make the guy blow up.
Yeah. There is a bit with the notes in here where you get a sense that he's a little OCD and it makes me uncomfortable a bit.
Yeah, that's the later Shiro stuff that I wish he did less of is the kind of like while they're having the conversation about if the guy though they claim diplomatic immunity for one of the
Hmm.
people there and it has a little note that says people like Ito are kept as hostages and they're of no use and then exchanged for spies etc who've been caught and I feel like if you get the rest of this you'd get that.
Yeah, he seems to not trust his readers, and that's where it's like he is genius level, but the cost of that is the assumption that other people can't keep up, right? Like he's had too many experiences where he's talking to someone probably excessively and their eyes glazed over, and so he assumes that of the readers as well.
But I think he's kind of missing the point. Like I think that it's still dense and hard to get through, and like his ideas are so dense, but then the things he explains sometimes are not necessarily what the problem is.
No, they're even denser.
Yeah,
Like his notes are even denser. So do you know this says 1989 on what says chapter 2, but I think this was like a zero issue, wasn't it? This thing here, the prologue.
Huh.
Was
Yeah,
was this done beforehand or not?
I'm not sure. I mean, it might have just been released in 91 and he worked on it for a while.
Or this was a drawing he had done early on in the character design process or something?
Yeah. Um, yeah, let me, it makes me want to look at the dates on the other Ghost in the Shell.
But that's another one of those images that I just forever remember is the way she couches into this robot.
Yeah,
The way
the weird kind of no line between her crotch and the seat really really stands out.
Yeah, but this the design. I think this was actually seeing his stuff. Some friends at school, I think my sophomore year of high school, were somebody had these and were passing them around, or I read it in Wizard or something. And that was the first time I ever tried to go draw manga eyes. I remember I had a whiteboard at my parents' house and I tried to draw the manga eyes and I couldn't do it. But Shiro was definitely the first manga artist I was really aware of.
Yeah, it's interesting seeing kind of just his overall influence in American stuff. Like a lot of stuff you wouldn't think. I remember Rob Liefeld years ago just like posting a bunch of Appleseed images and talking about like where he got things from his style that you don't associate with it.
That makes sense. I was just I've been since we did the Akira Toriyama, I've been reading the Dragon Ball Z, and I also see the some of like what Liefeld does with arms and stuff seems like it's coming from there, like the short stubby arms with like the stuff wrapped around them,
Oh, sure.
like the Piccolo character has Liefeld arms. Anyways, so now we're in the second chapter or the first chapter after the prologue, and there each one of these is a pretty self-contained little story, and they seem to have like a pretty tight little thematic concern throughout them. The biggest thing I got out of this one was he was really interested in like how fragile and hackable cybernetics would be if you had them implanted. Like here, the character just goes up and like plugs a jack from his head into the other the major. Is that her name? The major?
Yeah, Major Kusanagi.
Yeah, so he plugs a jack into her head and they're sharing information.
Yeah, to
Um,
basically avoid being listened in on, they plug directly. This made me think. I don't know if we talked about this recently. There's an Adam Warren Dirty Pair series that really took a lot of ideas from this in a much more kind of fun Dirty Pair way, where they have a gang of criminals that all have these plugs on them, and they keep their personalities on little chips that they can plug
mm.
into anyone. So in the same way that he's just walking up to her and plug it in, it'll be a guy who pulls out his personality and plugs it into a stranger and then takes over their body.
Oh yeah, see that's super creepy. And this is where like it all sounds cool at first, but I think he's very well aware also of like how much worse the world will get with these kind of things, or also like that tech's not perfect, right now he's the Batu is complaining like, "Oh, you're making these awful sounds," and she's like, "I can't help it. My new audio implant's got a bad connection."
Yeah.
So, like, we think about, "Oh my God, we could enhance our senses, we could share thoughts and all of that," but it's like, "Oh, what would that experience be like when you've got a bad audio connection, but it's going straight to your brain?" And
Yeah, and they have
he
these
has like,
weird. You think that see the patterns on her neck is interesting too.
yeah,
She has that, and then there's a bunch of circles on her forehead that he kind of draws sometimes.
they doesn't really explain what they are.
Yeah, it reminds me of there's a '80s manga called Heavy Metal Warrior Xenon with an X, and it was about a cyborg that when he became more cybernetic, he would get these lines on his body, and it makes me feel like they're kind of appearing when like almost like in like Neuromancer and William Gibson's book, they talk about like having like special tattoos almost that are it might be like things that just like appear when they're being interfaced.
Or that it's like an emotional reaction causes something like that. That's an interesting thought. And then here he gets into that idea of like being on a chip or something, and he says a hacker is a criminal who infiltrates other cyber brains, stealing information, manipulating data and programs. And he's talking about that in a psychic sense. The
Mm-hmm.
penalties for genius hackers who can infiltrate ghosts is particularly harsh. And he's talking about the ghost as the soul or the psyche. So that is very scary as to me. And I need to read Orion, but doesn't that kind of sync up with this idea of how like spirituality works too? Doesn't he have some larger vision on that?
Yeah, yeah, they're all, yeah, it's interesting 'cause a lot of my ideas of Shiro were kind of formed when I was like 15 or 16. So it's
Hmm.
interesting to go back and see he has a much more he has a much more kind of, I don't know, autistic worldview of than a lot of manga
Yeah,
creators
he
do.
does.
Like he thinks a lot. It seems like he thinks a lot about what's going on in Europe and America as well as
Yeah.
just his work.
But he seems to have some idea of like this the soul as part of I think he believes the same thing I do, that reality is informational at its like it's computational at its lowest level of description, and
Sure.
that there's something in that data that corresponds to us that exists beyond us, and that you can like interface with that through a person psyche. And so like if you're going in, you're basically hacking into someone's informational substructure, you're hacking into their soul. And like that we by going to an information-based society are finding a scientific way to deal with what we used to call magic, is kind of
Mhm.
what I think he's suggesting. And we've actually given people technological tools for messing with someone's spiritual side, their soul, that those things are now no longer separate. And so the punishment for that's particularly heavy. But I'm kind of just mapping my own ideas onto him a little bit too, I think. But I'm not sure. I'll have to read Orion.
That sounds accurate. Kind of more touched on in Ghost in the Shell than Orion in some ways, probably because Orion he deals with like the larger universe and less on specific individuals.
Well, yeah, but I'm wondering, I'm curious to see what his larger universe is, because then that would justify my reading of what he's thinking about individuals, if he has that kind of assumption about how the world works. Um, and then he's kind of using that to talk about telepathy. So I really like the scene here where they're all kind of sharing, it looks like.
Yeah, it looks like
Uh,
there's no text in your panel of that, and I've got a bunch of text on mine.
it's all translated on the side.
Oh, I see. Is it in Japanese there?
This is all in Japanese, yeah.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
It's
because the
like
version I'm
really
looking at also
scratchy.
has English sound effects.
I don't know if this one has. I'll have to see. I don't see a sound effect on this page.
Oh yeah,
But
on the
all of
previous.
this stuff's in Japanese, very thin and scratchy, and then it's translated on the side. And
Okay.
at the bottom, he's talking about decentralized psychic data, which is interesting that when you copy a page of something, the original doesn't disappear. And then the same way, information isn't really lost when it's stolen in this story. The only way that you can really know it's stolen is by detecting when an improper contact is taking place. So that's really interesting that you could steal someone's data, which we really have now. You could steal their psychic data, but it's not gone. You've just like made a copy of it without their permission.
Yeah, you
Is
just know what they know, and it's something they talk about here is so she does the psychic connection to avoid being listened on with her whole team, and they all feel like they're like what's that bitter taste in your mouth like do you know that your hand hurts a little bit, like they all experience everything that she's feeling, and she talks about them not diving too close to her ghost.
yeah.
It's an interesting idea because essentially it's like what's the surface level and what's your soul.
Yeah, and like once you've given someone like a jack into your head, like what other barriers do you put up? So he's kind of going into that as well. And he's talking about the power is determined by the number of keys that they have access to each network and their ability to break through defensive barriers. So like the training, there can be multiple rulers existing simultaneously in the cyber brain world. So they can kind of partition off parts of their psyche to have more or less access, like psychic firewalls and stuff. But then they're talking about like they have these multiple rulers. So like they're setting up characters inside of their brain that can like sub personalities or something. It's really interesting. And it's all definitely things that I think we're still going to have to grapple with that he's being prophetic about that we haven't even seen in the real world yet.
Certainly.
And then on the next page, they're talking about a war orphan, and they call them a sacred citizen, which to me seems like where we're at now in the world, with like there's certain people who have had enough disadvantages put in front of them that they become like the yeah, the sacred citizen. They're the one that we must protect at most cost, which is also an interesting extrapolation from where we were at in the 90s to where we're at politically now.
Oh yeah, good point. Yes, in this they've got a sacred citizen relief center.
Yeah, and she says Sacred Citizen Relief Center, what the hell? And then well, it's a welfare facility. So they've got this thing in their society that like takes quote victims and turns them into patients, and it's presented as like a beneficial thing. But then when they go in there, it turns out to be, this awful like
Right, child
basic
labor camp. And it might just be,
indoctrination center, child labor camp. Yeah.
yeah, I wonder if you're reading kind of more modern takes on things in it. It might just be like a, like when you take something really evil and you give it this like pleasant name to make it sound nice.
Well,
Like,
yeah, but I think that's a process that's been happening where we've been selling certain philosophies and programs that were definitely being sold in the academic culture in the 90s.
oh sure.
And they've only been filling into society in the last since 2015 or so, 2013. He seems pretty aware of that because when he talks about some of his political stuff too, he's always very wary of both socialism and capitalism, and he's pretty into the mechanisms of how you sell those. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think
Visually, I
part.
like his fade to gray.
Oh yeah, that is really cool. Yeah, when I was younger, I always assumed that Shiro was more kind of a like a Japanese more right wing because his stuff is so military centric and but I think he's much more complicated than that. He's just a very he's clearly has got like he's obsessed with SWAT and military and things like that, but he has a really broad sense of what's going on in the world.
Yeah, I think reading Appleseed really the hardest thing about understanding it was understanding what exactly he was trying to say about where sh society should go. And
Mhm.
you and Sean both convinced me that he's saying it's all like none of this is going to work. The most you can do is be a competent individual within these broken ass systems. So I see
Yeah,
him as not even an anarchist, but just as someone, yeah, the competent outsider who works on the inside. I don't think he has any allegiance.
yeah, I think that's accurate.
And then here he's talking about like having your mind hacked again. And he said there's a complex maze of simulated experiences. So the firewalls would be more like this video game that you have to play, a
Mhm.
virtual experience you have to go through to break through the firewalls. I think that's a really interesting idea. And then I noticed Briar Rose down here.
Oh yeah, I missed that. Yeah, him and Diane are sitting on the stairs.
Yeah, so then I wonder, like, are these supposed to be in the same worlds, or is that just a fun throwaway?
I think it's just a fun throwaway because I think Japan doesn't necessarily Japan has a different name in Appleseed.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, it's like new something or another. And then we get a look at how they're actually treating the sacred citizens that they've said are their most precious thing is it's child labor and indoctrination.
Uh-huh. I like how one of the children's got like old man male pattern baldness on the second panel there on that
Oh,
top.
this,
Yeah,
yeah. And this character is really fun looking too. It really kind of showed to me the variety that he has. Like I tend to think of him more as like this kind of taking what was done in Akira and then like carrying it out to the next extreme. But some of this stuff really shows other influences, I think.
yeah, and their timing, they have them eat on a timer. They're like eat now, and then they have a stopwatch. It's like stop now.
Yeah, now to your workstations, and they zap this kid for trying to get one more bite.
He does a interesting thing too, where he takes the on the page on the left there, that the second panel is repeated lower down. He just copies that and shrinks it. It's the same exact drawing.
This drawing?
No, the group of the kids sitting at the table.
Oh, here. Yeah, he does. Huh. That's interesting. Because he normally doesn't take shortcuts.
Yeah, but maybe it's a complicated enough thing, and the joke is just like that they go exactly back to the same thing. I think he added a couple. Yeah, he added food to their mouths, and that's the only difference. Is they have
Oh,
some food on them.
yeah, that makes sense as a joke, though. I hadn't noticed that. And then you get to see like this is the, everyone going to work. And then they say you can, instead of being a slave laborer, you can take the education course. So that's where the indoctrination parts come in. And this guy says, forget it. They say it's worse than here. They turn you into a vegetable. And what are they going in? They're going in to rescue someone from this. What's the major's mission in this one?
Good question.
I'm forgetting. I got this is the only problem I have with the Ghost in the Shell stuff is I'm getting so much more caught up in the notes and these extra thoughts he has that I don't really think about it in plot terms very much. But
Yeah.
here they have the teach mech. We're definitely getting to that where we're gonna have AI. I've seen articles about they're starting to employ AI teachers in elementary schools in certain districts trying it out. And they're gonna sell that under the guise of like customized learning to your learning style, right? The AI is gonna figure out your kid exactly, but this is where we're headed.
So do they hack into the education course?
Yeah, and then but see, this is the thing. There's like all these layers of politics within what he's doing too, where they're like setting them up somehow. This mission is like a setup for them to get a task force in place, and she
Yeah, is
doesn't
there
know
something
she's being
earlier where
set up.
they don't wait until they get a mission, they wait until their group gets funding. They're like, we've got the funding, let's go.
Yeah, but they're trying to form some new group through this thing. It's crazy that these are like what 10 page. I mean, they're not even a full comic issue, are they? I guess maybe they're 24 pages, but you could talk about each one for like an hour.
Yeah, they're really dense.
Um, and then he's talking here about the antenna function of the brain down in the notes. One of the basic abilities of the human being, uh, yeah, he says maybe better called spirit, has always been channeling, whether making contact with easily intuited so-called phenomena in one's internal universe through so-called qigong, or
Mhm.
energy control synchronizing with the external universe. And that's where I was talking about that idea that reality is like informational or computational at a base, and we are able to align our internal states so that they become a more porous like interface, and that's kind of what magic is in
Mhm.
my mind, and he seems to be describing that here in a technical sense, and then goes on to say for cyborgs whose bodies are almost completely machine, it's simple to put their sensory mechanisms in sleep mode so that they run a scientific cyber brain switch. They can easily enter a quasi-channeling trance. So they're like getting rid of their perceptions and just aligning their inner states with the outer states and allowing them to communicate with existence around them. It's like really fascinating shit, and it's just a footnote in this story about breaking some kids out of a.
Or maybe even just exposing the facility. It's interesting too. The kid that she hacks into is number 28, which is Akira's number.
Oh, okay. I didn't catch
That
that.
might just be a coincidence. I feel like I don't know if Shiro
No.
wants to
This
make not.
he seems pretty heavily influenced by Otomo, don't you think?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, there's something there.
There's something about the way that he handles line work that's similar to me. Even if the faces aren't quite there. Like the male faces more often. Like this face.
Yeah, or even the guy above with the cybernetic guy.
Yeah, this is a very Otomo.
Yeah, that's a really cool page where it's them uh, essentially snipering somebody's plugins in the back of their neck.
Yeah, like that's what I'm saying is this whole story is very much, I think, thematically based around we all think that this is like cool future tech Neuralink. I could control my computer with my brain, but then you have a hackable port that a sniper could shoot like they basically shoot like a thumb drive with a kill code into the back of his head, right?
You'd think you'd want to cover that up, put some like have a plate between that and the outside if this is happening so much.
Yeah, it could flip up like you wear a hoodie or something. Uh, I don't know. It sounds like an awful world that they're in to me.
And then they take the kid that escaped, or they kind of forced to escape, and they stick something in one of his plugs, and then kind of release the guy. I really like that top panel where the robot is pulling away his cord.
Yeah, and I think what they're doing here is they're doing like they call it ghost back brainwashing and I think what they're doing there is they're like doing a like you know how on your computer you can do like a reset to like a save point 3 days ago, like if something goes wrong in the computer sometimes. I think they're doing that as a countermeasure to the brainwashing, like three escape attempts and they brainwash him. He knows the rules. He must have a death wish. And then they talk about this ghost back brainwashing. And then if you ghost out, then you die. So
Yeah,
you
they
could
also talk about
actually
how this is a government facility. Also, the three guys that the guards that find the kid. The middle one is, I think it's a character from Dominion with the sunglasses on.
this character. Okay. Man, you know what? I really wish that they would put out new versions of all of his stuff. I don't understand why this is a creator that we don't have like constantly available.
Yeah, I think I
Because
mentioned before, years ago I met up with some of the Dark Horse guys because I have a little book. It's a tiny little Akabon book of Appleseed pencils, and I was in Portland, so I just had a meeting with some of the Dark Horse guys and was like, can you put an artist edition of this? And I remember them being like, we need to get Appleseed back in print, and this was years ago. So I imagine it's just that they've, Berserk is all their money, and this is kind of like I mentioned. I mean, Ghost in the Shell is in print, but Appleseed and all this stuff isn't. If I understand right.
yeah, Ghost in the Shell because it's had the movies and the anime, but yeah, none of the other stuff is in print. They could all use a good hardcover print.
Yeah, and
Um,
I'd love an artist edition of the stuff. Like I have no idea how big his originals are. It'd be really cool to see that.
oh, that would be awesome for sure. I would love to see what his originals look like because these are very well reproduced, but I still get the sense that the line work might even be a little crispier and cleaner,
Yeah, because
less
most
gummy.
mangas are much smaller than American comics, but there's so much detail in these. I have no idea.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if these were drawn about the same size that me or you would draw. Because when I watch like Monban, they're all about that 11 by 17-ish size, it looks
Okay.
like. Looks like, I don't know. Um, Another thing that I found interesting in here is he's talking about the blood-brain barrier as something that like is put up as a protective barrier for us, and that they're thinking about these things crossing the blood-brain barrier. Uh, I've the is a special mechanism to ensure that foreign substances in the blood never directly attack the brain. But we're with COVID, that's one of the things that as Tori and I do more and more research about long COVID, they're finding that COVID does cross the blood-brain barrier. So even him talking about that as like a protective measure that's breaking down was really interesting to me.
It is interesting. Another thing I keep getting stuck on is the version I'm looking at has got the English sound effects in it, and it really changes panel to panel. Like the bottom
Oh,
panel, which is the M's, seems so much less aggressive than the Japanese sound effect on the one you're looking at.
Yeah, this barely even notices it because it's just part of the perspective of the panel here.
Yeah.
Like it keeps in line with that. Um, they do have little translations here, like in the gutters, which I guess is like my preferred way to do it. But he has so many damn notes all over, and I really don't need sound effects in comics. Like I don't need that. I'd rather just the visual of what he's doing.
Yeah, well, I
Uh,
think it's like because I'm a big proponent of making sound effects that aren't real words because you kind of know like you don't need to know Japanese to get what the shapes he's doing are. So it does seem kind of unnecessary to let you know that says Chirac or whatever.
Yeah, like I can fill in the vroom like they're racing through a tunnel. I don't need to know if it's the sloshing of the water or the air in the tunnel. Like I get it. I know what's going on. I don't know. I don't think I've ever even used this sound effect in anything I've done.
Also on the previous page, they they seemingly like kill the woman who's their tech operator, and Kusanagi just says she's just a speaker. Security will repair her.
So she's just like an android or something.
Yeah. Yeah, and he does something I like a lot in this with ghosts and calling her a speaker. He does a lot of stuff he just doesn't bother to explain to you, even though he other over explains other things.
Yeah, but then he does say in the next panel that they'll reprogram her. There's something sad about these ghostless bots. So he
Hmm.
definitely, even though he explains somewhere else that he thinks everything has a ghost, even like rocks and trees, he's seeming to think that these artificially created things, at least the society doesn't consider them to have ghosts. Maybe that's part of the point later on is that they do. I don't know. I haven't read the full thing yet. It's so dense.
Yeah, I
Does
really like.
does he get more into that? Like is there a political battle over the rights of things that are perceived as not having ghosts?
Um, I mean the robots talk about revolting at a certain point. A lot of it's touched on, but not a major story point.
Okay, and he definitely has a note in here somewhere. I don't know that I put a note with it that he's like, "Oh, normally I like to explain the politics a little bit more, but in this one I'm trying to background that
Mhm.
information." So he does say that explicitly. I really like this panel.
Yeah, it's basically like it shows the enemies also have the ability to kind of try to hack into the characters' brains.
Yeah, and how painful that would be. That's why I'm not putting no damn neurochip or retina optic retina sensor or anything in my body. It sounds like a setup for a nightmare. And
I
you
really
get
like that.
another one here.
Oh yeah, and that one's just kind of like almost like unreadable text going through, and then they blow up his machine. He's using that. He's able to do that with.
Yeah, and like it's like traveling through different brains as nodes to get to the machine too. Like he has to hack through the network of their brains to get to this guy's machine.
Yeah, and then we have the first thing of, or I guess in the zero chapter, she also turns invisible.
Yeah, with the
Yeah,
first see-through major. And they talk about an invisible cape that someone's wearing. I just saw that China has unveiled invisibility cloak material that warps. So that's now real.
it's interesting they call it invisible cape because it just seems like she's just covering her. She's just put on a hat basically.
But it protects all of her.
Yeah,
I know that's like the Harry Potter too, don't they have an invisibility cloak?
yeah. China's just got to Harry Potter level technology.
Yeah. Well, we haven't got it here, I don't think. And then we go back to his typical thing about individualism versus like collectivism. Is thank God, man, you come to finally free us, haven't you? What do you want? Do you just want to eat and contribute nothing to be brainwashed by media trash to sacrifice the nation's future for your own selfishness? Basically, like, no, fuck you all. I'm not here to save you.
It
And
seems a
listen,
little harsh for like it's like a child in slavery, and she's like, "What do you want to live off the state?"
yeah, yeah, exactly. And then she's like, listen, kid, you've got a ghost and a brain, and you can access a cyber brain, create your own future. So that's very much that like competent outsiders like, look, the systems aren't going to save you. Like I could put you into the new system and it's going to take advantage of you just the way the other one did and in some other form, but no, you're smart. Just fuck you, figure it out.
Yeah, but this felt a little like Shiro getting more political than the story called for, because it is really funny to see her like, because he is a child slave and she's immediately chastising him before talking to him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where you get him as like the legit genius, just not be. I get the sense, even with the notes and everything, that he just really sees everyone else around him as stupid and not up to his par. But I mean, also, can you imagine being, how old was he when he was doing this?
It's probably late 30s.
Late 30s. Okay, I thought he was younger than that. But
Yeah,
he had
because I
like,
mean, yeah, Appleseed was done in his like he started I think in his early 20s. And that
so
was
he understood this stuff like really early on. And if Appleseed was happening in the 80s, like he really, like I said, this book's so prophetic and it's not done being prophetic either, I don't think. Like he really must have felt like he was 150, 200 years ahead of his time. And like, of course, everyone felt stupid compared to him. And it's hard for me to not see him mapping that onto his hero characters that
yeah,
they're like,
he also always has, I mean, she's very much like a Dunan type, like highly competent military woman that's scolding stuff. I feel like it you don't really see his male characters act that way.
hmm,
It might
yeah.
almost like he's both projecting and also like look at this powerful you know, military cyborg woman scolding these people.
Maybe that's what he wishes for. Like he wants a woman who can keep up with him. Like these are his dream women.
Yeah, his male characters seem much softer than his female characters. In this, you have the Batu character, which seems much more like Briar Rose, which is in Appleseed is kind of Dunan's, like he's kind of older and wiser and kind of reins her in sometimes.
Ah, okay, interesting. See, that's what I miss out from not having read all of his stuff, but it definitely makes me more interested because I think he's pretty focused thematically. Like he has a view of the world he's trying to express in these things.
Yeah, I also want to point out how much I appreciate his 1991 fashion in this, where she's wearing this like tucked in shirt with the collar popped up and little fingerless gloves.
Yeah, I mean, come on, that stuff's super cool. And then
Yeah,
some really great cartooning here of this guy punching himself in the face because he's also been hacked.
yeah. Well, she hacks. She's like, let's communicate directly from it, and she punches him in the face for sending him on the mission.
Yeah, and there's so much physical like slapstick comedy available in that world, and it's fun that he uses it, but also interesting that, where he shows his restraint. Like it could have been a totally a comedy series too.
Yeah, and then in the page, she's like, guess that's the end of my military career.
And then that sets up whatever political machinations were going on there, where she feels like it's the end of her career. Then this boss guy comes in and basically lets her know, like, hey, I was I was like doing this whole mission that we went on to get your guys's group defunded so that he can set up an international anti-terrorism unit that's
Right.
based on skill and merit. So that's another thing I appreciate about him is the reader and the character are both in the dark and you both get the reveal of what's going on and you both kind of feel a little bit lost, like you can't navigate the political system because it's bigger than you.
Totally. Oh, if you go back a page, there's a really good layout, I think, on that. Where it's the one of the characters at home, and you're kind of in the black um, of the hills around his house, and I really like that half a page is like a self-contained comic about him going home and dealing with his family, and then while his wife's working on dinner, he's hiding under the table reading a book called "Change Your Career" with a pirate pig on the cover.
Yeah, it is. He's like grouped this very tightly as its own thing and using the hills as like couching it in the story. That is really nice. And
Yeah,
also just like all of his tech drawings.
yeah, they're really beautiful. I was going through some Appleseed, and I was realizing that in the Appleseed book I was reading, he's much less concerned with establishing a place than I often am and stuff, and he cuts interesting corners, like by not forcing himself to redraw a bunch of environments over and over.
Hmm.
Um, Also, in the Change Your Career book, the pig pirate makes me wonder because the pirate pig was a mascot character for Young magazine, and I forget which one this ran in, but it might have been in that.
Oh, so he might have been talking about trying to switch to a different magazine or something.
Oh, I feel like it would have been like maybe this ran in Young magazine is my guess because that feels like a big egregious move to be like, um, let me put another mascot. It's like having Spider-Man looking at like the DC Comics logo and being like, maybe I need another job.
But like if he felt, well, I guess this would have only been the first Apple's or Ghost in the Shell that came out, so they wouldn't have been looking at canceling it yet or anything where he needed to go looking for another home for it.
Oh,
I doubt it.
looking
So
where his
that's is that that's the wrap up of the first real story in here.
yeah, and they blow up they blow up what they think is the chief's car, but then he's gone there on a little motorcycle, which is a nice little joke.
Yeah, he's a nice he's a well-prepared spy. He knows the typical tricks. And
Yeah.
then this is as far as I read. I read this third one here.
Oh, at the bottom of that page too, they show what happens to the kids that are now in charge of the thing, which is a very cynical view of things. He's like, it's like without child slave labor, they're not working as much as they should, and they're spending all their money on just fancy haircuts.
Oh, so they've all been released from
Or
the
they're just yeah, they're running their it's their slave labor camps now being run by children, which is a kind of a funny take on what happens to child slavery. Like now they're in charge of slave labor.
but yeah, but it's also like a comment on socialism, like the pure idea of socialism where the workers are 100% in charge with no like they've still got a camera and stuff watching them, but like really no state control that at all is just bottom up worker generated. It's not accounting for how many people want to take breaks. That
Yeah.
you got to keep some authority structure to keep the majority of the population working because otherwise they'll happily just like check out.
Ghost in the Shell was serialized in Young magazine.
Okay, so that would have been what he's referencing here.
Yeah, yeah, the pirate.
Okay.
And
Well,
I only
this
know
is
the
as
pirate
far as
last.
I've got so far. I need to now jump into this
Oh, sure.
chapter. This is the one with the missing page, correct?
Yeah, 2 pages. There's a the sex scene. It's the only. I don't know if I mentioned this before. It's the only thing I'm aware of where a Japanese artist redrew a page or redrew a panel, the bottom panel where she's jumping out of the boat for the American market, but they didn't change the they didn't change the translation of the page afterwards, so it reads really weird in that edition you have.
Because they're
Basically,
still talking about the party
yeah.
that they were having.
So she jumps on the boat, and in the Japanese edition, it's just like a hardcore sex scene, and then Batu is connected to her, and he's like, I can't deal with this. This is too um this is like too intense for me. But what they're trying to sell in the American version is he's just seasick because she's on a nice boat, which
Oh, because this shows her like she's been engaged in the sex scene with these other two women, and he's experiencing it through her
yeah.
in the original. Oh, yeah. So did
So
he
yeah,
redraw this too? Or he was getting sick from the
yeah. Well,
experience?
in the original version, they show him like first connecting to her during the sex scene and kind of reacting.
Oh, okay. So he like taps in halfway through, like, hey, boss, oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems like they're also like he says like drugs. So it almost seems like there might be like having some kind of drug simulation to enhance the whole experience. Um,
Oh, so he's coming into like an immediate high as well.
yeah, and he's just like out in the jungle, like like looking at rich people through binoculars, and suddenly has to like deal with that. So it makes much more sense in the Japanese version. It's just um, a weird kind of band-aid on a sex scene in the
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know why it's not put back in this volume because later in the volume you've got all this color stuff that's like pretty, like just sex in cyberspace type of stuff it
yeah
looks like. So I don't know why they kept that cut out, but whatever. I'll figure it out as I go.
yeah
So
well
that's as far as I've got is this one, and
okay.
we'll have to reconvene uh with Junk Jungle, and we'll probably have to take them one or two at a time because as you all can see, they're very dense.
I mean, that's a nice thing. I feel like I often get different things out of Shiro stuff than you do because I'm always going with a very surface, like looking at the cartooning and looking at the like even the initial chapter zero political stuff I kind of skimmed over, and I was more focused on like how SWAT was setting up the mission, and that they all the little computer techniques, and meanwhile you're going into like what the meeting's actually about. Like even like we talked about the child labor camp, like I kind of skimmed over why they're there.
Yeah, but that's makes it really fun because you have like this really deep knowledge of his whole career, how this relates to other works of his, and you are noticing like the little things like the guy's eye going around the corner. And that's just like me as a personality. I tend to look at what's the big picture and I'll gloss over. Like I'm not so good with character names and stuff because it takes a while for those details to set. But I think when you combine the two, you really get a sense of the totality of what he was doing is that his big picture stuff was so thorough and so well thought out and so solid of an idea of how things work for him that it made its way into every little decision he's making. And that seems to be what makes the work so difficult, but also so rich. And yeah, I get why he has the reputation that he does and deserves.
Yeah, it's really compelling. I'd be interested in what his influence on other manga artists, because we talk about like how it influenced kind of what we know about Americans that were reading his stuff in the 90s, but I like um there's one comic that was translated that I'm spacing on the name of during the late 80s that was a essentially like almost drawn early Shiro style by another artist. It's almost like a fan comic they translated. I've got it in a box somewhere.
Hmm.
I'll dig it out.
The,
But
the only one I can think of that seems similar is Alita.
oh, interesting. Yeah, I certainly in a lot of like the Ghost in the Shell themes.
Yeah, just the cyberpunk kind of world in general. But yeah, I don't feel like you see a lot of his influence anymore, or Otomo, really, which is sad because that's to me like peak manga, the greatest manga. And you get a lot more of the Dragon Ball and that kind of influence, I think.
Yeah, well, I think the major disconnect. I mean, it's kind of the Miyazaki thing where he complains about uh, fans of work doing work that's based on other work rather than going out in reality. And I definitely think that that's the thing that both Otomo and Shiro were doing, is they were looking uh, more at the external world,
Yeah.
and doing comic books about that. Because like Shiro's art style is really hard to. Some of it's kind of hard to pin down where he's getting things from, and it always comes back to like him just looking at film. You know, like
Mm.
there's a British SAS film called uh, "He Who Dares Wins" that seems to be the biggest influence on him that I'm aware of.
Well, and you can tell like in his notes and stuff that a majority of what he's consuming is philosophical, political, scientific material as well, and that is manifesting in what he's doing in his art in some mysterious way, to me at least.
Yeah, I wonder what that part of his brain has been doing in recent years, because I feel like I know he wrote a comic I haven't read yet that's drawn much more kind of cartoony manga style by another artist. But it's like he's shifted so much to just doing like sexy lady pinup art that I would imagine that he's just also writing tons of essays that nobody's reading, or that he's publishing under his real name.
I think I've wrote it in notes a few times that like when I'm reading his stuff, when I'm reading Appleseed, I feel like he he did so much. Like I don't know, I did this with my philosophical journey too. You go so deep into it that eventually you just have to go, okay, I'm pretty comfortable with my view of the world now, and they're like it's only painful to get engaged in that kind of deep thinking. You can't do it all the time or you drive yourself crazy, especially someone like him
Sure.
who's very much seen where we're going. He's been right almost about everything, and he's going to continue being right for who knows how long to come. Like I think someone like that, the best answer is just, look, I made my money. I can't change the world. Fuck it. I'm just gonna like relax now. And to
Right. But I
me,
also
that's what that stuff looks like.
do view Appleseed as like him being wrong in a more fun way.
I
Like,
don't know
because
that he's wrong though. I think the ultimate point of it is right. Is like, I don't know, man. Like you can expend all your energy trying to change things, or
sure.
you can just focus on leading the best life you can live within the
Well, I'll say
system.
maybe when I say he's wrong, I mean maybe on like a surface level of it being like about genetic manipulation rather than cybernetics. Because it's like it's basically like he's like, what would a perfect society take in Appleseed? And it's like, well, we need to have perfect people, and those aren't normal humans, so they have to be manufactured people. And then what are the problems that come up when you have a society that's mostly manufactured people?
Yeah, but I don't know that he's wrong about that. I just don't think we've got there yet.
Okay,
Like
that's fair.
I actually think Ghost in the Shell probably will be concerns that happen sooner, and then we may or may not get to the biological. That seems like a second step to me. But yeah, I don't know that he's wrong there. I think that's a little further away. But when you look at what's going on with AI now, it seems more feasible to me that that will help us figure out the tech that he's talking about in Appleseed. Um,
Certainly,
I
it
don't,
is
I
the
don't know. It's all very scary.
it is very scary. I just watched a movie. I'm trying to remember the name of. It's the one where Bruce Willis is in a world where everybody wears fake robot bodies of themselves.
Oh yeah.
It starts with an I. It's like it's not insert in.
I don't remember the title, but I do remember watching that movie. And they're just like in tanks.
Kind of. Well, it's like they're plugged into like a cybernetic thing where your entire life is made like you go outside in a fake body all the time that looks just like a prettier version of yourself.
But they're kind of like in like a tank or like a tanning bed type of
Yeah, they're
situation
in
where their real body's like protected and fed while they're hooked up. Yeah, that could happen. Uh,
surrogates. That's what it's called. Um, yeah, so surrogates really like Ghost in the Shell made me think of that because a lot of the Ghost in the Shell like I'm unsure if I don't know if he ever says if Major Kusanagi is a real ever a real person or if she's just an artificial person.
yeah. That will be I'm curious to see where that goes because he does have the speaker character. It's like, well, she's a ghostless robot, but then he does say elsewhere that yeah, everything has a ghost. So I'm curious to see what he makes of that kind of battle. What seems to me like a really, again, a pressing ethical concern that we're gonna have. I think we should already be having it over Midjourney is if these things can learn, then does the company have a right to make money off of it without its permission? Like that seems like a more pressing ethical legal concern than the copyright issues that people are worried about.
Interesting.
Um,
I got
so
the
I'm
idea that
curious to see how he plays that out.
yeah, I remember I saw some Instagram thing that you posted that sounded like people are kind of misreading what AI actually does on the copyright.
Yeah, I mean, when they're talking about the AI image making as like a photo bashing thing, they're not understanding how it works. It's just looking at images, turning them into they turn the images into noise very slowly in front of the AI. The AI basically watches the image degrade into like a white noise TV screen, and then they reconstruct the image. And of course, it's got tags in it, like selected areas. This is the human, this is the eye, this is the face. But it's just learning from the deconstructed and reconstructed imagery, and then it's forming concepts, and then those are leveraged to, and it's understanding, the large language models are understanding how humans learn language, and then you put those together and it understands, okay, here's a screen of white noise, please hallucinate out of this Captain America done by Wes Anderson. And then it has, it knows what Captain America is, it knows what Wes Anderson is, and then you give it that seed of at least this is how Midjourney works. You give it the seed of the noise, and then it hallucinates an image out of there, which is no different than how a human works either. You just show them clouds and they'll hallucinate something out of it, right?
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. That's interesting. And it's something that I think that's the thing that's unexpected that's happening right now is you have artists that are very slick and talented. Like Derek Kirk Kim
mhm.
was getting people accusing him of using AI because his work just has that aesthetic to it.
Yeah, I think that's a real problem. I feel sorry for those people. I've seen some accusations, and there's not like if someone uses it at some step in their process and you can't really tell if that's what they did or not, I don't see the problem there. But there's two ways that I've heard that these lawsuits are going. One is just straight up copyright infringement, that there's a piece of my stuff in there and I didn't allow it, which is not true. That's not how it works. So those copyright lawsuits, I don't see how they have any legs. The second one that I've heard is a fair use argument, where they're saying an artist has the right to determine how their work is used, and these companies didn't get permission to use the art for training. That one actually acknowledges how the AI works. It's not saying it's a cut and paste thing. It's just saying I didn't give you permission to train something with my artwork. But I think that's going to set a pretty weird
Yeah, that's
precedent
really weird
for
too.
artists, like that an artist can have control to say who can look at their stuff.
Yeah, it does create kind of that weird thing where it's like someone's like, "Oh, this artist clearly learned to draw hands by looking at my stuff. I'm going to contact them and tell them to throw my books away."
Yeah, I didn't give this like I could see, like, okay, if we set this legal precedent, you all of a sudden have a precedent where someone could come along and say, like, my religious beliefs means that I don't want homosexuals learning from my art. And it's a fair use violation if homosexuals look at my art. Like, and I think that's actually the best way that we're going to have to trap these companies, is to let them, like, the only answer to that argument is like, hey, this thing is a learning agent of some sort. Whether it's intelligent or not doesn't really matter, because we can't answer that question, but it can obviously learn, and this thing has the right to learn. So then it becomes like a social rights issue, where should we allow artists to deprive other learning capable entities of learning? And like, obviously we don't want to set that precedent, because then none of us can learn from each other. Um, the companies are going to have to make that argument, but then I think we can open up a backdoor to where it's like, okay, well then you're a slave owner, basically. Just because you created this thing doesn't mean that you have the right to profit off of the work of a learning entity. And that's like a second social kind of argument that will need to be made. And so I'd rather like let them make that argument in the fair use case, and then say, look, this thing has to be, you can't monetize it. It has to be publicly available, stuff, because like you can't just trap a bunch of kids in a room and tell them what to draw either. Like, they're learning agents. They have some learning capacity. And if these things, they deserve the same rights.
I guess the argument is when something isn't sentient, it like because then it becomes every tool has the ability to like at what point do you set a tool free versus uh a sentient individual?
Yeah, I think we'll have to be pretty clear about sentience versus intelligence versus agency. But I think like you could still make the argument that if something has the ability to learn, which these obviously do, it may not be sentient or intelligent in the way that we are, but like, I don't know, my hammer or my screwdriver doesn't really have a learning capability to
Sure,
it,
yeah.
and it doesn't have agency in the world. But AI can kind of operate. I mean, the AI art doesn't yet, but a lot of these AI are pretty much just let loose in the wild, and then no one knows what they're doing. So they can
Totally.
obviously operate in the world without human input after a certain point.
Yeah, yeah. I saw an interesting argument where there was a DC Comics artist or someone was accusing them of using AI, but then in the accusation, it was talking about like this guy did a great run of this Bat series, and I really hope it's not AI. And that made me feel insane because it was somebody basically saying like I need my, and this is something I guess we've been in the last couple of years, the idea of like I need my art ethically sourced, you know? Like I need to make sure that the artist is creating work that I like. I enjoy the work, like that's the at the start, but I need to make sure that the person is creating it in a way that I approve of, which to me is insanity. Like if you read and if you like with us with Shiro, we're like we enjoy the work, so now we're trying to figure out where he's coming from and how he did it and everything. But we're not like, I hope he drew this on a desk that I approve of. You know, I hope that his pens weren't weren't stolen out of the hands of dead children. It's like
Yeah,
we're not.
I don't approve that he didn't like hand paint the effects. He like used a photocopy machine, and you can decide anything pisses you off, and you can glom that onto your judgment of any art. It's just irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. Like,
Yeah, and I think
is
that
the
that's
book
a
good?
major problem is getting the morality out of the process seems really important to me that that's just not a conversation because that seems so ridiculous.
Yeah, I just obviously I think it's ridiculous as well, especially with the AI stuff. It's like look, the part of the reason this stuff is so concerning is because it passes the Turing test for can it make an image that you can't tell the difference between. Obviously, we're to the point where people see Derek K. Kim's work and think, "Oh, it's AI done." And it's not. Like they can't tell the difference. And so I don't really see the difference at this point, you know? Like if you enjoy it, you enjoy it. If you don't like really doorknob rendered slick stuff, then don't like doorknob rendered slick stuff. Or you look at that book and it's a fucking mermaid in a mech suit with a cute little axolotl guy. Like it's cool. Who gives a shit if an AI made it or not? It's a fun idea and a fun story.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, it's interesting because I definitely want to engage with artists' work based on their life and what they're pulling from, but it is also like if something's cool and interesting, then that it has a value of its own. Like it becomes more about your experience with the stuff rather than how it's produced. Because that's usually like much of our stuff with art anyway is it's about, I'm sitting here with a Ziggy mug. We told you about my Ziggies. I have this. I've imprinted onto Ziggy because when I was in high school, or when I was in middle school, I got to go skip gym class and draw under a Ziggy poster for an hour,
Oh.
and so I associate Ziggy um, with this artistic freedom that Tom Wilson, the creator of Ziggy, never put on it.
Well, I mean, it's a back and forth, right? Like, I don't, there's people who say it's all interpretation. Like, you'll never know what the artist actually thought because you can't get in their head. So fuck it, make whatever you want out of it. And so that has limits. It's like Ghost in the Shell is not about the ethics of raising horses. Like,
Sure.
you could map that on it if you want, but it's just obviously not where the guy's coming from. Uh,
I really thought of. Are you familiar with Shiro's Wild Wild West?
no.
It's like a porn portfolio thing about a sexy cowgirl lady that hooks up with a bunch of big muscular men with horse heads, and that was fun
Yeah.
in my head. Like that's his work about raising horses.
Yeah, so he has that work, but that's not Ghost in the Shell. And I don't think there's any use in denying. I think there's great value as a reader, both trying to understand what the artist was doing
Mhm.
from their point of view, realizing that that's constructed from your point of view. But you should still be looking at like, why did they make this? Like, that just seems absurd to me. And then, like, yeah, even if you don't approve what was going on in their life or how they technically did it or conceptually I mean, with Dave Sim, like all the time, everyone hates where he went in the last half of the series, especially politically and religious thought. that doesn't invalidate it as a very like important document. Like if you want to know how someone gets there, here's 25 years of someone showing how you get there,
Yeah,
and if you don't like those thoughts, it's done with so much artistic integrity. You don't have to agree with the statements that are in it to find value in the work and learn about how someone gets to that place. Why would you want to ignore how someone gets to that place? So I don't
yeah,
think there's any value in just denying the author's intent either, just because you don't like where it came from.
yeah. And it just kind of, as humans, we have to approach things with the idea of we're all capable of going any direction. So we might as well, like, being kind of a competent human being requires you to investigate directions you don't want to go as much as directions you want to go, and understand um, how to avoid those pitfalls, even if you want to.
And you should be doing that like with the most exceptional representations of that viewpoint possible. So when you're getting someone like a Shiro, if you don't agree with his political outlook on the world, you can at least be confident that it's coming from someone who's not uninformed.
Yeah,
This is an exceptional individual who put exceptional amount of work and love and blood and sweat and tears and research into what he's doing. You can't just write him off, and I think there are things like Dick Fight Island that
sure.
are done lazily and you can like pretty easily write it off, but there's a tangible difference, and I think, the things that stick around and draw this kind of heat to them, if something's getting a lot of heat, it's probably obvious that this is an exceptional instance of something. Otherwise, people who dislike it wouldn't be paying attention to it. It wouldn't be scaring them. So, yeah, go read it. Disagree with it while you read it, but appreciate how well these things are done, at least.
Yeah, now I'm imagining the the depths that Shiro would go into if he did Dick Fight Island.
Well,
Like,
it's the depth that you started going into when we recorded that video. Like,
true.
okay, what happens when a trans person comes in? Like, where the babies come from? Like that, that has a ton of societal
Where the babies
implications
come
that
from.
could be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's even Ghost in the Shell. That's kind of my thought too. Is like where, and I think they get into it later in the books too. Is where the artificial people are grown.
Oh,
I
I
listened
look forward
to
to that.
audiobook. I might have mentioned this before. I listened to an audiobook of the Charles Stross uh, Saturn's Children, which is really fascinating. It's all um, post-human kind of robot future,
Hmm.
and the idea in that is that we haven't figured out how to create our own AI, but we can map out the human brain. So
Hmm.
every artificial person that exists has to go through, like, they basically raise a child, and then they can copy that child's brain. So there'll be like, a million different people that all had the same basically competent childhood, and then they grew from there.
Oh, that's interesting. That makes sense. That there's a movie that's kind of like that too. Johnny Depp, they can't make an artificial intelligence, but they figure out how to upload the map of his neurons, and then that creates the first artificial intelligence because they couldn't do it from scratch, but they could mimic the map of the neural connections.
Okay.
So specifically digitally. That's an interesting idea. Anyways, it's all scary stuff. And that's just two chapters worth of conversation. So we will be getting to the rest of Ghost in the Shell, I'm assuming very slowly, but I look forward to talking to you more about it, Brandon. And
Okay.
we'll throw in a third voice next time, hopefully, and then we'll have an 8 hour video instead of a hour and a half video.
Yeah, there's no shortage of stuff to talk about when Shiro's involved.
Well, thank you for talking about it today, Brandon, and we'll see y'all again.